Okay, so think about this. You pour yourself a glass of wine, maybe a really nice, bold Napa Valley Cabernet,
Classic choice.
or maybe, a big Australian Shiraz. You instinctively think about, well, the grapes, the place, the winemaking
Sure,
process.
the sun, the soil, fermentation.
Right. But here's where it gets really interesting and maybe a bit surprising. What you're actually tasting, it's not just about that. It's deeply connected to centuries of human movement.
Ah, okay.
Yeah, these incredible immigration patterns that basically transplanted wine traditions from Europe to, well, entirely new continents.
That's a fascinating angle.
It really is. And the story, how this global wine map got drawn, it's not just history for history's sake. It's really a story about, incredible courage
Definitely.
and adaptation and just that basic human urge to recreate the flavors, the feelings of home, even when you're in a completely foreign land.
Yeah, trying to find that familiarity.
Exactly. I mean, these people, when they emigrated, they didn't just pack clothes or tools. They were carefully carrying, like, precious vine
Right,
cuttings
the actual living plant material.
and ancient techniques, things passed down through families for generations. And even family recipes, all of it, across oceans.
It's quite a journey to imagine.
Mm.
And you see how something that maybe started as simple homesickness, just wanting that taste of home,
Hmm.
it ended up completely transforming entire regions. It basically created the global wine scene we know and, well, love today.
Absolutely.
We're talking about a huge historical arc here. You've got Spanish missionaries planting, some of the very first vines way back in California,
Right. In the 1700s.
all the way to, say, German immigrants setting up vineyards meticulously in places like South Australia. It's a wide scope.
So our mission today in this deep dive is really to unpack how these movements of people didn't just spread wine production around the world, but how they fundamentally changed the way the whole world thinks about wine. We've dug into the sources, pulled out the key insights, really, to give you a shortcut to understanding this captivating story.
Sounds great. Where should we start?
Well, let's get into that earliest chapter, the one that often gets maybe a little simplified, the Spanish conquistadors.
Okay, yeah. 16th century.
Right. They weren't just focused on spreading religion, though that was obviously key. They were also, maybe unintentionally sometimes, laying the absolute groundwork for winemaking in the New World.
That's a crucial point.
The sheer determination involved back then, it's just remarkable.
It really is. And what often gets missed about those first Spanish plantings isn't just what they brought, but why they brought it.
Okay.
Their main goal, initially anyway, wasn't commercial profit. It was wine for religious services, for mass.
Ah, so purely functional in a sense.
Exactly. And that very specific focus, kind of paradoxically, led to vineyards that had to be incredibly tough, really adaptable, able to survive for centuries.
Right, because failure wasn't really an option for the intended purpose.
Precisely. And that survival paved the way for commercial success later, maybe in ways that traditional European setups wouldn't have. They brought the key Vitis vinifera grapes, the European grapevine,
The foundation.
the absolute foundation. And they set up these huge mission vineyards, building the very first winemaking infrastructure across the Americas. We're talking Colombia in 1530, all the way up to California by what, 1769?
Yeah, that's a huge spread.
And that infrastructure, that bedrock, is what allowed places like Argentina and Chile, eventually, to become the world-class producers they are now.
That makes total sense. Necessity driving robustness, you could say. But then things shift, right? In the 19th century, you get this really different wave, the German influence, particularly in America.
Yes, a very different dynamic.
These weren't missionaries. These were often, skilled farmers, craftsmen, maybe looking for better economic opportunities.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And they carried with them a much more, let's say, sophisticated, sometimes even scientific understanding of viticulture from places like the Rhineland.
So they weren't just planting, they were selecting.
Right. This is where you see a shift. Instead of just sort of dealing with the terroir they found, they were actively looking for specific terroir in the New World.
Hunting for the right spot.
Yeah. They settled in places with climates that felt familiar, surprisingly similar to back home. Think about Missouri, like Herman.
Oh, right, the Missouri Rhineland.
Exactly. Or the Finger Lakes in New York, Lake Erie in Ohio. And their impact was huge because they brought not just different grapes maybe, but also advanced fermentation techniques.
More control.
More control, a real focus on grape selection, and crucially, they wove wine into everyday life. It became cultural.
Ah, that's a big difference from the mission focus.
Huge. Towns like Herman, Missouri, they called it the German Athens of America. It had wine gardens, festivals, social clubs, all centered around wine. Completely different from the, more utilitarian mission system.
That shift from religious need to cultural celebration, that's fascinating. Okay, next up, we absolutely have to talk about the Italians
Ah, yes, the Italians.
because they brought something incredibly, well, resilient, that strong family vineyard tradition.
Absolutely key. Fiercely dedicated.
Totally. They were so committed to keeping their ancestral grape varieties going, their specific winemaking methods, often against, really tough odds.
And that dedication is central to their story.
Hmm.
Italian immigrants, they set up vineyards all over. California's Central Valley, for instance. Argentina's Mendoza region.
Yeah.
Huge Italian influence there. Australia, too. And they brought grapes like Sangiovese, Nebbiolo, Barbera to completely new soils.
Right. Grapes that define Italian wine.
Exactly. And what's really remarkable is how that family focus, that tradition passed down,
Yeah.
allowed them to keep these winemaking practices alive across generations,
Even through difficult times.
especially through difficult times. Think about Prohibition in the U.S. Italian-American families, they didn't just stop.
Really? How did they manage that?
Well, they found ways. Legal loopholes,
Hmm.
labeling wine as grape juice concentrate for home use,
Clever.
or producing small amounts, technically for personal consumption.
Yeah.
This wasn't just about having a drink. It was almost like a defiant act of cultural preservation.
Keeping the tradition alive, literally underground sometimes.
Pretty much.
Okay.
And it meant those techniques, that knowledge of their specific varieties, it survived. It laid this crucial foundation for America's big wine comeback later on.
It's incredible, that resilience. Okay, and then, of course, the French influence. Can't forget that.
No, absolutely not.
Their immigration stories often involved people fleeing, maybe religious persecution like the Huguenots, or political turmoil later on.
Right. And they carried centuries of, well, you could argue, the most refined expertise, the peak of old world sophistication in winemaking.
So what distinguished their contribution? Was it just better grapes?
It was more than that. It wasn't just about bringing the idea of terroir. It was the incredibly detailed work of figuring out how, say, Burgundy's chalky soils or the gravel in Bordeaux, how those concepts might translate or even need to be adapted in totally new environments. Places like Napa or Coonawarra in Australia.
So not just copying, but interpreting.
Precisely. They didn't just mimic. Sometimes they had to almost redefine what terroir could mean in these new places. And yes, they brought premium grapes,
Yeah.
Cabernet Sauvignon, Chardonnay, Pinot Noir,
The big names.
the big names, plus advanced ways to manage vineyards, sophisticated aging methods using oak. This really pushed the new world towards quality, towards complexity. It wasn't just about making lots of wine anymore.
That's a vital point. Innovation driven by adapting, not just replicating. Now, Australia's story, that seems particularly unique. It started with convicts, didn't it?
Yeah, a very different origin story there. And then waves of other European immigrants came later, but those early English settlers, they really struggled.
Why was that?
Primarily, the climate was just so harsh and unfamiliar, and frankly, a lack of deep viticultural knowledge for those specific conditions. Early attempts often failed.
So if we connect this to the bigger picture, Australia is maybe the ultimate story of adaptation.
I think you could definitely say that. It really took the arrival of more skilled immigrants, Germans, Italians, French, mainly in the 19th and 20th centuries, to really kickstart things and turn Australia into the major wine player it is today.
Right.
You look at regions like the Barossa Valley, famous for its Shiraz. That's heavily thanks to German immigrants blending their old world know-how with new world realities.
Dealing with extreme weather, I imagine.
Oh yeah, extreme heat, drought. They had to develop really ingenious irrigation solutions, things that maybe weren't needed back in Europe. And it's important here, too, to mention the role of women,
Ah, yes.
especially within these immigrant families. They were often the keepers of the flame, maintaining family recipes, traditional techniques, and frequently, they were the economic backbone of these new vineyard operations. Their resilience was absolutely foundational, even if it's often overlooked.
That's a really powerful point about contributions that maybe don't always make the headlines. And, this whole story, it isn't actually finished, is it? Today's wine world is still being shaped by modern immigration, modern movement of people.
That's right. It continues to evolve, bringing new ideas, new techniques, even new grape varieties into both established and emerging markets.
How does it look different today, though?
Well, what's interesting about contemporary wine migration, let's call it, is that it's not always about, mass movements driven by hardship like in the past.
Okay.
Often, it's highly skilled individuals, winemakers, viticulturists, sommeliers moving internationally. They work harvests abroad, exchange knowledge, bring cutting-edge techniques back home, or apply them in new regions.
So like a global knowledge exchange.
Exactly. It's that same centuries-old tradition of transferring knowledge, but happening much faster now,
Mm.
much more interconnected. And factors today, like climate change forcing adaptation.
Finding new places to grow certain grapes.
Right. Or new economic opportunities, shifting political landscapes. These things continue to drive movement and innovation. You see new wine regions popping up, new styles that blend traditional knowledge with really modern, sometimes sustainable or organic practices, things that might have seemed radical even a few decades ago.
It's a constantly evolving picture then.
Absolutely. And if we sort of zoom out and connect this all back, this whole story of how immigration patterns brought wine traditions across the globe, it really does enrich every single wine tasting experience, doesn't it?
It totally does.
It turns what could be just a simple drink into, well, a living history lesson in your class.
It really does. Like
Yeah.
next time you taste a California Zinfandel, you can actually think, okay, this connects back to Croatian and Italian immigrants.
Precisely. Their influence is right there.
Or that Australian Shiraz that everyone knows. You're tasting French Syrah genetics fundamentally, but adapted and really perfected over generations by all sorts of European immigrants dealing with that unique, tough Australian terroir.
Couldn't have said it better.
And think about Argentine Malbec. That's French immigrants taking a grape from Cahors and seeing what it could do in Mendoza's super high altitude conditions. They created something totally new and, frankly, spectacular.
A whole new identity for the crate.
Yeah. Or even, say, a crisp Washington State Riesling. That often showcases German immigrant expertise, but applied to the specific climate of the Pacific Northwest.
It becomes clear, doesn't it?
Hmm.
Every great wine region we talk about, every really interesting bottle you might open, it all started with someone being brave enough, or maybe desperate enough, to carry their home traditions to a completely foreign place. These immigrants, they didn't just bring vines across the ocean.
Yeah.
They brought their culture.
Yeah, a whole way of life.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And that's what created the incredibly diverse, exciting, and as we said, constantly changing wine world we get to enjoy today.
So maybe the final thought for you listening is this. The wine that's actually in your glass right now or the next one you pour. It carries the hopes, the struggles, the dreams, and definitely the hard-won expertise of countless immigrants. People who really believe that maybe, just maybe, a good glass of wine could help make any place feel a little bit more like home.
A powerful connection.
It really is. Something to reflect on, perhaps, next time you sip.